Okay, take a second and just look around the room you're sitting in right now. Really look at it. The walls holding up the ceiling, the light overhead. Notice how you're just effortlessly breathing the air without even having to think about it. It all feels so incredibly permanent, doesn't it? It feels like the whole setup was perfectly designed for you, kind of like the world has just always been exactly like this.
But here's the crazy thing, it really hasn't. In this explainer, we're going to take a bit of a documentary-style trip way back through deep time. Because if you rewind the clock far enough, this quiet, comfy spot you're hanging out in right now turns into a landscape that would literally take you out in under a minute. For more than 99% of this planet's existence, Earth got along just fine without us. It was a wildly hostile, violent place, completely ruled by things you wouldn't even recognize.
Okay, let's dive into this. 4.5 billion years. That's roughly how long Earth has been spinning around in the dark. Now that's a number our brains basically just short-circuit trying to hold on to. It's way too big to naturally wrap your head around. To actually grasp the sheer scale of 4.5 billion years, we need to completely flip our perspective.
Imagine a massive modern sports stadium, and it's filled all the way to the brim with popcorn. If all of that popcorn represents the entire history of planet Earth, then human history, literally everything we have ever built, discovered, fought for, or written down, would equal exactly one single kernel resting near the very top of the pile. We are just a single grain of sand in the Sahara. So you gotta wonder, what in the world was going on in the rest of that stadium?
Act 1. A world of lava.
We're stepping back to the terrifying, molten beginnings of our young planet. Seriously, forget everything you know about lush green forests and deep blue oceans. Let's ask a very simple but kind of frightening question. What would actually happen to you if you just magically materialized and stepped out onto Earth 4.5 billion years ago? Well, the first thing that happens is you die. Right on the spot. It would be blunt, instant, and completely brutal. The entire surface of the planet is basically a giant boiling ocean of liquid rock, trapped under this thick, choking orange smog of carbon dioxide. There's absolutely zero oxygen for you to breathe. And hey, if you somehow managed to squint through that toxic smog, you wouldn't even see the moon up there, because it didn't even exist yet. Instead, you've got this rogue planet about the size of Mars, scientists call it Theia, just hurtling blindly through space, and boom, it slams directly into the young Earth. And this brilliantly illustrates how lucky we are, because that completely incomprehensible crash threw an enormous spray of superheated debris into orbit. Over millions of agonizingly slow years, gravity clumped all that rock together to give us the moon. But that's not all. The sheer force of that hit literally knocked our whole planet over by about 23 degrees. That little tilt, that's the only reason you and I have seasons today. If Theia misses by a fraction of a degree, the world as we know it simply never happens.
Act 2. Poison gas and ice. So, eventually the lava cools down, the first shallow oceans form, and life miraculously shows up. But for 2 billion years, this whole planet belonged exclusively to microscopic specks of slime. They ruled quietly and invisibly, holding the crown longer than every plant and dinosaur combined. There wasn't a single thing with a face on the whole planet. But then, these tiny microbes did something that almost wrecked the entire experiment. Some mutant strain figured out how to eat sunlight. Photosynthesis, right? Well, in doing so, they started burping out this highly reactive waste gas. Now, to you and me, this gas is literally the breath of life. But back then, to almost every living thing on Earth, oxygen was absolute corrosive poison.
It kicked off a terrifying domino effect. As this toxic oxygen waste built up, it wiped out huge swaths of existing life. Geologists politely call this the Great Oxidation Event, but honestly, it was an apocalypse, and the devastation didn't stop there. That new oxygen systematically stripped away the methane gases that had been keeping the planet warm. Without that heat-trapping blanket, all the warmth escaped into space, and the whole Earth literally froze over from pole to pole. It became a giant, brilliant white snowball. So the ultimate irony here is that the very air sitting in your lungs right now, it's basically the leftover chemical weapon from a catastrophe that turned Earth into a frozen wasteland.
Act 3. Monsters and Extinction.
Amazingly, life somehow clung on under that suffocating ice. Jump forward to a little over 500 million years ago and boom, the Cambrian explosion. Life suddenly gets big, it gets weird, and it gets fast. Forests rise, oceans fill up, and Earth is finally lush and green. But let's be clear, it was still a total nightmare of a place. Picture Earth 260 million years ago. Dinosaurs aren't even a thing yet. Days are only 22 hours long, and the land is run by things like Inostrans via.
Think of a bear, but it's a reptile with curved fangs literally as long as your hand. On land, it didn't matter how big you grew as a plant eater, because one of these relentless sprinting monsters was always waiting for you in the shadows.
And then we hit the absolute closest call life on Earth has ever had. A massive volcanic region in modern-day Siberia basically rips open. We are talking unimaginably huge oceans of lava pouring out nonstop for hundreds of thousands of years. It pumped so much carbon dioxide into the air that the oceans turned acidic and the entire planet roasted. By the time the skies finally cleared, an estimated 90% of all species on Earth were just gone, wiped out. Only a desperate 10% survived. They call this the Great Dying. The tree of life was violently pruned, and the world stayed broken and largely empty for a very long time.
Act 4. Dinosaurs and the Asteroid.
So how does life bounce back from that? Well, it rains. Starting around 234 million years ago, the skies opened up, and they didn't stop pouring for roughly 2 million years straight. A bone-dry planet turned into a soggy world of endless storms. Now, before those storms, dinosaurs were basically nobodies. They were scrawny, relatively rare little background players that made up maybe 5% of the land animals.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what happens next. When that epic 2-million-year rainstorm finally stops, the whole environment has flipped. It's wildly humid and lush, and dinosaurs were perfectly adapted for it. They go from 5% to making up more than 90% of all land animals. That single endless rainstorm essentially handed the keys to the entire planet over to the dinosaurs, and they completely owned the place for the next 150 million years.
We all know how their mighty reign ended, for sure. 66 million years ago, a rock about 10 kilometers wide, basically a flying mountain, slams into the Gulf of Mexico and rewrites all the rules in a single afternoon. It threw so much pulverized rock into the atmosphere that the sun effectively went out for months. In the freezing dark, the plants died, the food chain collapsed, and the great giants starved to death. It was the absolute worst day in the history of large life. But underground, small, terrified, furry little mammals burrowed into the mud and the roots. They could eat almost anything, bugs, roots, scraps, so they literally waited it out in the dark while the dinosaur empire burned. And those tiny, shivering furballs crawling through the wreckage, those were our direct ancestors.
Which brings us to Act 5, the survivors of survivors. I really want you to sit with this for a second. If that asteroid is delayed by just a few minutes, it misses Earth entirely. The dinosaurs almost certainly keep running the show forever, and our furry ancestors stay small, hiding in the shadows. That rock forcefully kicked open the absolute only door we ever had to exist. But here's the wild part. Even when our specific species, Homo sapiens, showed up about 300,000 years ago, we very nearly didn't make it. We shared this world with at least 4 other distinct human species, other people just like us, making tools and sitting around fires. And today, every single one of them is completely extinct. We are the only ones left.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Look at this massive stack of absolute catastrophes. The Theia impact, the Great Oxidation Event, the Great Dying, the asteroid impact. When you pull back and look at the whole picture, it is stunningly clear. We are absolutely not the main characters of this planet's story. We are just the survivors of the survivors of the survivors. So, look around your room one last time. Look at your own hands. If you pluck out any single one of those cataclysmic disasters, if you tweak the timeline by even a fraction of a degree, you and I aren't here right now. Earth operated perfectly fine on oceans of lava, invisible slime, terrifying monsters, and just sheer, blind cosmic luck. It was never some polite warm-up act waiting patiently for us to arrive. It literally did not need us at all. Which leaves us with this one haunting question to end our documentary journey today. What if you were never the grand point of it all? What if we're all simply whatever happened to be left standing when the cosmic dust finally settled? That is a wild thing to think about the next time you take a breath.